Yeah. Firstly, I want to thank you for accepting my invitation and accepting to be on my show.
Yeah,
So, thanks, man, for giving me your valuable time.
yeah, you're welcome.
So, can you please introduce yourself to my audience?
Yeah, I'm Justin Garrison. I am a developer advocate at Amazon with the AWS containers team. So I help advocate for users of any Amazon service, in that case, any AWS service, but also specifically focusing on how people can be successful with containers, how they can use the services for whatever it is that they're trying to build or trying to run.
So, what exactly your job is?
In a lot of ways, my job is educational. I spend a lot of time teaching people in public, on YouTube, at conference talks, various places wherever there's a lot of people that are trying to learn. But also, I spend a fair amount of time in the product team improving our products. So I sit with the actual EKS product team to help improve any EKS services that someone's trying to use. So if I get customer feedback from online or a conference talk or something, and someone says, "Hey, I'm trying to do X, Y, and Z with this service, and I can't do it," I can point them in the direction of support docs or whatever else, like a workaround possibly. I can even build something that's also a demo or a proof of concept. I'm a developer by trade, so I know how to write software, and I was a AWS customer beforehand, so I'm very familiar with how the tools work. And then if neither of those are good solutions for them, I can bring the feedback internally to our product team who runs the service and help prove out the use case from the customer all the way back to the product and say, hey, this is what this customer is trying to do. Here's a proof of concept that I think fits their need after whatever feedback, and then we can prioritize those sort of tasks as well. So I can help test early features to make sure that it fits what I see outside with what people are trying to do, but then also suggest new features and improvements.
Okay, in simple words, you will understand the needs of the customers and you will be giving the resources that you have and which matches to their needs.
Yeah, and inside of Amazon, we typically call that the empty chair, where
Okay.
any meeting has an empty chair, which is the voice of the customer. And in many cases, that's me. I fill that role of this is what I see people using, this is how they're trying to use it, and this is how I think this feature should be built or this function should work. So that includes things that are already being planned and built, and also brand new things that are going to be rolled out into the service.
So, what made you to come into this? Before that, what was your idea and who inspired you?
I I kind of found myself doing a developer advocacy role by default. I like helping people get better at whatever it is they're trying to do. I have a long history of doing podcasts and doing conference talks before I was developer advocate. This was just I was doing this in my free time as something that I thought was worthwhile to do because I love investing in people. And as I was doing that more and more, I was growing in my career. So I was a developer, I was a sysadmin, I was running larger scale systems, I was using new tools, and I found myself that in a lot of those cases, I was able to stay a little ahead of the curve for a lot of things. So I was able to take what I learned in my day job and or even just for fun because I play with it all the time and then help people learn what I was doing. I go to a conference or I'd write a blog post. I wrote a book a few years ago. All these things were ways that were me trying to help people, to teach them, to kind of go out and say, okay, this is what I think the next wave is. This is where I think you can get better. And I was doing that already. These were things that I was just passionate about because I love just helping people. And when I learned about a developer advocate role, I was like, well, I kind of do that already. Like, there's a lot of things that I'm doing there that I do in my free time, and why not kind of merge some of those things together? So I loved my job before being a engineer and a developer full time, but there were also just parts that like conflicted with prioritization of, hey, I really want to go teach this, hey, I really want to go to a conference talk, and those were always like, well, if you have time you can do that stuff. And now it's flipped where I get to do interviews like this and conference talks and YouTube videos and whatever else most of the time. And then the other times I'm like, okay, well, now I really want to dive deep into learning this technology. I want to learn how to, write an app for this service, or how a customer is interacting with something. So it's stretched me a lot over the last year or so of doing it, where I've done a lot of I actually write more code now as a developer advocate than I did as a developer. But I also write more different code, where it used to be that my focus was my focus of what I was writing was very narrow, and I would always do backend systems development, or I would do automation. And now I find myself switching a lot between front end development work, some back end development work, some product work. And so I'm kind of all over the place with where I'm developing things. And it's opened my mind a lot more to how customers and more variety of customers are using the tools, because it's not just a backend engineer with a focus on one piece. They're still there. I still know how to talk to that group, but I've been writing a lot of front end, and I never wrote front end before. And so now I'm understanding, okay, this tooling in this ecosystem is different. So how do we meet the needs for those users?
Okay, before that, you was a podcaster and you are a blogger and you are into YouTube and you are a content creator. You are
Yeah.
interacting with people.
Yeah, I guess before we called it that.
Yeah, so you understand what they want and what they need, their ideas and their thoughts.
I wouldn't say early on that I knew. Early on, it was just me writing into the void of the internet, of just saying, hey, this is what I want to know. This is what I was learning. And it didn't matter if people were listening or not, or were watching. It was just a matter of, hey, I thought this was cool. I'm going to talk about it. And in some cases, I wrote it for myself. Like, a lot of my early blog posts were for me to reference again later, where I wrote a lot of like fundamental Linux tutorials early on in my career. And I referenced those myself on my own blog for years. It was just me like, hey, let me go Google this answer to this thing. Oh yeah, I'm the number one hit for that because I wrote it, and then I forgot I wrote it 2 years later. And so a lot of it early on was just for that, of just me learning myself, and then just like showing what I was learning. But that did definitely evolve into more of a focused, hey, how do I use this tool and this engine to actually help people with what they're trying to do? And that's a lot more of what my focus has been the last year or two, is been really around helping other people with exactly what they're trying to do, and not necessarily just showing what I've been learning.
So coding means it's extremely it's a logical thinking. So can I say that logical thinking already that you have before coming into this?
I definitely I'm probably more logical than some people, even just from I went to university, and I studied math and physics, and so I like a lot of those rules and things. But I wasn't into computers. I didn't know computers until basically after university, is when I started to actually like got my first job with computers and that sort of stuff. So it was a shift for me of like, what is a developer and how to write code. I took a few classes in university, but I didn't understand it. I wasn't doing it as like, oh, this makes sense to me. It was really foreign. And so like I really struggled, and I dropped out of some computer science classes in university because I didn't understand it. And it wasn't until afterward when I actually solved real world problems and I didn't realize I was coding. There was situations where I was using Excel spreadsheets, but I wanted to automate some of it. I wanted it to do formulas in certain ways. And then I started realizing that like those formulas are Visual Basic code. Like that is actually coding. And I started going from more of a low code or no code situation into like, hey, now I can actually modify some of this stuff and I understand bits and pieces of it. I don't understand all of it, but I really understand some smaller pieces. And it was about growing that from like, I needed to solve a problem, and being able to tackle it from that aspect helped me a lot. But I still love no code solutions. If I can have a GUI and I can drag and drop some things, or I can just put in some like text replies, those things are all great ways that I still learn APIs and tooling.
So what is the difference between the dropped out Garrison and now?
10 years of experience, 10 years of trying and failing. I'd say it's just more and more ways of solving problems and solving different problems and finding solutions to each one. there's a saying at Amazon that there's no compression algorithm for experience. You can't take 10 years of experience and say like I'm going to learn all that in 1 year. And some of it you just have to learn as you go. And there was a lot of problems that I jumped into that I had no clue how to solve it. It was just a matter of like, okay, well, let's see if it's possible. And maybe someone told me it wasn't. Maybe someone had a document that got me started. Maybe there's a lot of situations where I can kind of like get a starting point and get like, okay, I know I want to solve that problem. What are the steps I need to get there? And in solving one piece at a time and just constantly iterating over those problems uh, is really kind of like how my knowledge base has grown. Beyond that, I solidify a lot of that knowledge by teaching it, and that's where I actually understand the concepts. I can do the work, I can fix the problem, but I don't necessarily understand it until I can successfully teach it. And so once I can tell someone else and then they understand it, then it clicks for me. And that's actually how like, oh, now I understand why I had to write that piece of code first, or I had to use that tool specifically, because those are different situations. And so those are all ways that like I found myself. Another reason I was doing blog posts and conference talks was because I was solidifying my own understanding of things by explaining it to someone else.
So that explaining nature made you to be wherever you are today.
I mean, a lot of things have got me to where I am today. I'm sure there's plenty of luck and privilege, but a lot of, I guess, visibility in how I've grown, especially going into a developer advocate role. I was able to show years of doing developer advocate style work, but without actually having a title of developer advocate. I wasn't, this is my first time being a developer advocate, but because I had a 10-year backlog of, well, here's my blog posts, here's my podcasts, here's the videos I made, here's these conference talks. Those were all ways that I could point back and say, hey, like I've been doing the work. Like I understand the outbound piece of it. I didn't understand necessarily the inbound piece, but the outbound side of it, I understood. It was the same way when I switched to be a system administrator. I wasn't a developer. I didn't understand systems. I didn't run servers in any sort of production or for work. I was, a help desk support essentially. I would answer calls and I would go help people with their laptops and desktops. And I switched from that to being a sysadmin by showing them, hey, here's all these articles that I've written over the last 2-3 years. Here's how I've been learning things. You can see that I at least understand how to tell you, I can explain the fundamentals for how Linux works or how file systems work or how network works. And I was able to show through my blog posts and through my podcast and those sorts of things of being outbound spoken and say, hey, can I have a sysadmin role? I have zero experience in the past with being a system administrator, but again, here's 2 years of showing that I know how to do it. And a lot of that, again, it was for me initially was me just for myself, but not realizing that that could also be used later to say like, oh, hey, look what I've been learning. This is how far I've progressed over 2 years without actually being paid to do this full time. This is, again, it was like me in my free time. I would work nights and weekends to write blog posts, and that was it.
So what is your podcast?
I don't do a podcast anymore. The podcast it's called Mintcast. It was for the Linux Mint community, and me and another person in the community started one. The person who runs Linux Mint was asking for volunteers to do a podcast, and I had never. This was 2006, I believe, and I never heard a podcast before in my life. I didn't know. I knew vaguely what they were, but 15, 16 years ago, like I never heard one. I didn't have an iPod. It was just like, okay, well, it's like a radio station, but it's recorded. Okay, yeah, I think that'd be fun. And so me and him figured out how to do it. We're just like, okay, well, let's have a phone call and we'll record ourselves and then we'll put it together. And we had roughly, some like document outlines, but this was, super early days. So like Google Docs was the thing. We could share Google Doc and kind of get some notes together and stuff like that. But we didn't know how to publish it. We didn't know where to host it. So it was all just like, okay, well, let's build a website for it and XML feed and put it to, Apple Podcasts and stuff like that. But we figured that stuff out. He and I did it for about 2 years. The podcast still goes on. We handed it off to another group, and they've been running it for years, which is amazing to me. But for us, it was just kind of like, okay, well, let's do this. Part of it was like reading the news, part of it was interviewing people from the community, and part of it was teaching people. And we were both passionate about doing that. And so we thought, okay, well, let's try to do this podcast thing. And it was a lot of learning experience. And we found out how hard it was to edit audio and how long it took to actually like record things. So we were spending, even if it was an every other week podcast, we were still spending 4 to 5 hours every week on it, because just tooling wasn't automated. There was no services for it. So there was a lot of manual work.
So you write blog posts still?
Yeah, I had a personal blog back in 2005 is when I started. And that blog's no longer up. That site expired a long time ago. But writing for my personal blog and doing the podcast landed me a part-time job for a site called How To Geek. And How To Geek is technical and some news articles. And I was one of their contract writers for 2 years. And so I did one article every other week or so about whatever I was learning at the time, whatever I wanted to teach. And I learned a lot in that setting for how to write where there was actually readers. My blog never got any readers, so I was fine just like putting whatever I wanted in there. But in the case of How To Geek, it was actually like, oh no, we actually have tens of thousands of visitors a day or whatever. And so I was like, oh, like this is serious. Like I actually need to like have some good pictures and make sure my punctuation and stuff is correct. And so I learned just like how that editorial process works. I learned how to like make some things more appealing to a mass audience, where it's like my personal blog might have been like deep technical, like this error, you paste in this code and you're good. Whereas on How To Geek, it was much more like, hey, if you're having a problem with this hardware or this software, here's some things that might improve it. And I can make those things to more general audiences. So I learned about how to kind of communicate at a broader sense, instead of just like me writing it down for my own reference, actually writing to teach a big audience.
So in simple words, troubleshooting, how to solve the problems, and which makes even a non-tech person to understand.
For sure, there was troubleshooting was part of it. I think more importantly was like how to write the words to help someone troubleshoot, because I can't just like copy the error and paste the solution. I actually have to like tell them the process and show them some screenshots, because some people will learn by like seeing the text, like a Google result might get them to the page, but then I actually have to show them like, here's the error message you get. Oh, here's the window where you paste that solution. And oh, here's the next step. And I had to go very deliberately step by step for someone that I couldn't talk to, because calling my parents and saying, okay, now reboot it. Okay, now log in and now do this. Like in written form, I have no idea what their state is. I don't know where they're at. So I had to be very explicit about every step and make sure that it was very clear what they were doing next and how that looked for them. And like if my screenshot didn't match their screen, oh, maybe they're in the wrong place. And so I had to make sure that like those things were up to date. So yeah, it was definitely more it was hard to do in a asynchronous sort of like, here's a bunch of information, let's make sure we get to you the solution you want.
It takes a lot of time.
Yeah, it did.
So awesome. So can I say that blogging and podcast made you to become more specific about things and be perfect in the present job?
For sure. I attribute doing the podcast to a lot of my career, where I volunteered to do a podcast every other week. And I had no idea what the repercussions of that podcast would actually have. Because even when I asked every employer as I was there, I asked the How To Geek editor, hey, why did you hire me? I was like, I only had a small blog, and like, actually, we really liked your podcast work. We liked that you were doing something on the side that was doing that work. When I asked my sysadmin role, I'm like, hey, why did you hire me? They said, hey, we really liked your How To Geek work. We saw that you were able to write things clearly, document things, and so we wanted to hire you, even though I had zero experience. And then just beyond that, it was just every situation built on top of it. And I can pinpoint it back to, hey, yeah, I did a podcast for 2 years, and whether people a lot of people watched it or not, it didn't matter. It was actually the initiative and the ability to like say, yes, like here's the technical things we ran into. Here's how we learned how to do collaborative editing, publishing to a website, making an RSS feed. All those things were other technical problems that we had to solve. And in a lot of cases, like that just led me one step further every time.
Okay. So you're a technical content writer before.
Yeah.
Okay. So how is your present job?
At Amazon, we write a lot. Amazon is a very document heavy sort of process, which is great. It's actually, to me, I really enjoy it because it allows us to be asynchronous in that we have people spread across the world, and we can say, hey, when you wake up, go ahead and review this document, give me some notes. But we also are very deliberate in writing things down, makes you be more clear about what you're saying. I can talk to you, and if there's uncertainty about what I said, you might be able to pick up what I mean by body language, by how I'm leaning, or what my facial expressions are. In written form, you don't get any of that. There isn't this other like grouping of like, oh, well, I understand what's going on now. But there's also no barriers for like, if I have an accent or if I'm tired or something right now, like we can interact in a written form, but in a lot of ways better than we can right now in how we're speaking, because I can be very clear, I can be very deliberate. A lot of like unconscious bias can actually just go out the window, because if for some reason you don't like me, whatever you say, like, I don't like any of Justin's ideas, we're not going to accept any of Justin's ideas. But if I write a doc and you read it, you're going to read it in your own voice. You're not going to hear me say it. You're going to read that doc and say, oh, well, like, I like these ideas. Oh, and then like maybe you're like, oh, Justin wrote this. I don't know. Maybe Justin does have a good idea. And those are like, it's a great process to actually go through, which has been fascinating for me for the last year being here. Actually, I wrote about this on my blog, the actual process of how we go through this. I found a lot of people write about the document forms that Amazon has. We have different types of documents. We have PRFAQs, we have one pagers, we have 6 pagers, we have all these like different formats, and people get fascinated by the formats. I actually didn't really care about the format, because I think the format works at a lot of companies however they want to do it. I wrote about the process on my blog, and I said, hey, the actual important thing is you write it down. And you write it down in a way that everyone engages with it at the same time. So at the beginning of our meetings, we read the document. Someone writes it, and at the meeting, we schedule it for like an hour. The first 10, 20 minutes, everyone will turn off their cameras and read the document. And that makes sure that everyone, once we start the discussion, is at a level playing field. Everyone understands they read the same words, and they all came to their own conclusions. They all might have their own feedback, but we know that everyone read the document right now. It's different if you like send the document ahead of time and say, hey, please read this before the meeting. And then you come to the meeting and like 2 people read it and like 8 people didn't. And there's like, it never really works that way to say like, hey, please go find some of your own time to do extra work for me. In this case at Amazon, we schedule the time. We say, this is my time block, this hour, please dedicate to me. This first 15 minutes or so, we're going to actually all consume the same information. And then we're going to talk about how we feel about that, what our opinions are, how we think that might work, how it might not work. And that's the process that is fascinating to me. So I write a lot of docs for any sort of meeting that I'm asking people to come to. I write at least 1 page of here's my thoughts, here's how I think it'll work, here's some possible things that are not good with this solution, here's some things that I think are great, this is why the customer needs this thing. And I can put all those down in a doc. I schedule, let people come. I say, hey, here's the document link. Go and spend 10 minutes, and then we'll come back on camera and we'll talk about it. Please leave notes, whatever. So I write a lot now at Amazon than I did at any other previous job.
So what I'm understanding is you're a very, very good communicator.
I have a lot of practice. I don't know if I'm good. There's
Because
plenty of times that I know I'm not a good communicator.
because without showing your face, just with your words you can create impact, and with showing your face and showing your hand movements and with your gestures you can create impact. You can send the message that you have in your mind to the person who is watching you or listening to you or reading your words?
And there's a lot of that is just practice. Some of that is just the process of just saying, hey, this is the pattern we follow. Because like there are uh, document templates where I can just like go find a template for the thing and say, okay, I'm gonna fill in all these answers. It doesn't necessarily make you a good communicator though. Being able to actually communicate the idea is a different ability of saying, hey, I can write the facts. A lot of people are great at writing facts. What I actually learned at a previous job at Disney Animation was how to tell a story. And that has impacted my ability to communicate more than anything. Where I worked with some of the greatest storytellers in the world, as far as I'm concerned, and the movies that we were able to produce were amazing. But it was all essentially the fundamental same kind of storylines. There's a handful of different story types, and they just tell them with different characters and different worlds and different constraints. And it turns out that that applies a lot of places where even if I'm writing a technical document about a new product, I can actually explain that in a story because I can use the exact same fundamentals of you tell a story with character and world building with some sort of conflict and resolution. And the most important part of any story is the conflict. If you don't have conflict, you don't have a memorable story. And every film, every good story that you remember has something that someone was overcoming. It was something that there was a conflict of saying like, oh, like how are they going to do this? And that's where you actually engage and you say, oh, I actually want to know now. Like, please tell me the answer because I have to know how they solved that problem. And being able to look at that fundamental of, hey, first I need to tell you some background. I need to say, once upon a time, this happened. Once upon a time, this customer tried to use our service and they couldn't. Once they can't solve their problem with our service, that's a conflict. And say, hey, they have a deadline of next week. They have to be able to solve the problem. How do we let them solve their problem? And then I can introduce my resolution. And that's when people actually say, oh, now I care. Now it's not just facts. It's not just here's the thing. And if you go out of order, it turns out it actually matters. In a lot of cases, like the way that people understand the story process, like it's hard to say like conflict first. Oh, let me tell you about the person. Oh, and then finally, here's how we solved it. By reversing that, you don't get any empathy for the person. You don't understand where they are and like how they got there. And there's a quote that anyone that writes about themselves writes about everyone because there's a shared experience in the world that like everyone's going through certain struggles and certain things where, like everyone can resonate with like I'm tired or I'm hungry or I want to be safe or protect my family. Those sorts of things are all like commonalities that like I can write about myself and everyone can put their own narrative in there automatically. Like you won't even have to try. It's just like, oh, like you were hungry? Yeah, I remember this one time I was hungry. It's automatic. We don't have to like think about that. But being able to tell the story that way helps a lot with being able to do what I do now. Where if I didn't work at Disney Animation, like I probably wouldn't have learned those fundamentals day after day after day. And I don't think I would have picked up on it and I wouldn't have understood it as much as I do now. And being able to say like, okay, that's actually how to do this successfully. How to do this role successfully is about engaging with people. But in most cases, it's about teaching everyone, because I do basically one-to-many conversations. I don't have a lot of one-to-ones. I don't talk to individual customers as much. I more do like a broader, like, hey, we're gonna do a YouTube video, we're gonna do a Twitch stream, something like that. And I'm talking to a lot of people. In that case, I can't individualize a problem. I have to generalize it and I have to say, oh, hey, this is the arc of the story we're going to tell you, and this is how we're going to make you successful at the end.
So, what are you before coming into like, I mean, before seeing the practical problems from the customers? What was
What
your
do you
mind
mean?
state? How because you know nothing about the problems, you don't have the practical experience. So before that, what was your mindset?
Well, in a lot of cases, I mean, I do have a lot of practical experience with what people were doing from previous roles where I was at Disney streaming before. So I ran infrastructure for Disney Plus, and then before that I was at Disney Animation. So I was making running infrastructure for animated films, and a lot of those patterns of problems we had showed up again and again and again, and new patterns of problems people are having in a lot of cases are remixes of old patterns. There's new technologies, there's new ways to solve the problem, but in many cases, it's kind of some of the same fundamentals where sometimes it's how do I build a asset and ship it every place? How do I scale a website? How do I program the specific function? Those are all cases of, hey, like we've had those problems before. So in a lot of cases, I try to understand what the person's trying to do and break it down into fundamentals and say, okay, once I understand what you're actually trying to do, then we can solve the problem. I can't solve the problem if you come to me and say, hey, how do I write this function in JavaScript? I don't know. I don't actually know that. I don't know how to solve that problem because I don't know what libraries you're using. I don't know what constraints you have. I don't know your experience. But if someone comes to me and say, hey, how do I serve an image to my customers and I want to modify the image? Oh, wow. Okay, like we can start there because that's a fundamental thing of an end goal. And I can say, okay, well, let's work backwards from you want your customer to have a customized image. Where is it coming from? Oh, well, I guess it's going to come from my website. Where does your website get it? Probably S3. Okay, cool. How did it get to S3? I don't know, maybe a Lambda function. Okay, well, what triggered the Lambda function? And just keep working backwards until we get back to, hey, I want to write a function in JavaScript. And I can get all the way back there by looking at just the fundamentals of, okay, what's the customer experience for you? And then how are you interacting with these things? Okay, cool. So if you want your JavaScript function to trigger that and that and that, maybe you should look at this tooling or this service or this process. And those are areas where it's much easier for me because I have a lot of practical experience, being able to say, okay, well, let's figure out how you solve your problem. There'll be a new problem next week. It's fine. Like we have to solve one at a time and figure out the most important problem for this week and working backwards from that.
So at last, do you have anything to say to the world who watches this video from anywhere on this planet?
I find it amazing how, especially in the last year with coronavirus and COVID, the world got smaller. Not only because people, like, my world started to become my house. Like, I didn't leave my house for so long, but also because it was a shared experience between everyone. And it didn't matter if I was in, my house in California, or I knew people in New York or in Europe, or I talked to a lot of people in Africa. Everyone had at least somewhat of a similar shared experience of, yeah, we knew people that got sick. Oh, it was impactful. Yeah, we started wearing masks. Yes, we were worried for our family's health. All those things were so universal. And it was amazing to me just seeing how small the world got when we had these shared experiences. And in doing that, I started talking to more and more people and understanding that there's a lot of people that are just trying to survive and they're trying to get better. And I talked to so many people that are trying to get into technology. They're like, I want to be a developer. I want to work in tech. And again, it's the same thing where I work backwards and say, well, why do you want to be in tech? Well, I need to make more money, or I need to, I want to work remote, or I want to, solve some problem for myself where I need to run a business or something. There's lots of reasons that people say, like, I want to get into tech. And talking to those people, it's amazing to me because it's still worldwide even is kind of a shared experience where people are seeing this innovation and this solution to maybe a problem, and so they think they need to learn it. And that's great that they want to, like, go that path and they want to get better. um, I would in a lot of cases suggest that people find, you know don't necessarily jump into, like, I wanted to be a developer, because that's where a lot of people land, and they're like, oh, well, tech is all about being a developer. It's like, well, no, like, you can solve a lot of problems without thinking in a developer mindset. Again, like, I started with spreadsheets and I wrote formulas and spreadsheets to solve my problem. I didn't know I was a developer. I wasn't getting into tech. I was solving a problem, and starting with the problem in a lot of cases will lead you down a path that you don't necessarily know, and you might find things that you really like instead of, I wanted to be a developer. Because for me, like, I actually don't like sitting down developing 24/7. Like, I don't enjoy being, like, a full-time developer. I love talking to people and I love teaching people, and I can't do that if I'm looking at a screen developing software all day. And that's what some people think of. So for anyone that's watching this, I would really, like, look at the shared experiences around you, look at what other people are trying to do, learn the things that are going to help you solve the most critical problem right now, and really just focus on one step at a time. Because for me, over the past 15 years, I would have never imagined that, editing Excel documents to, building software that helps people enjoy movies and enjoy stories, and that at a larger scale, and then running those services and improving those services at like literally a global scale. Like, I talk to people all over the world that use AWS's tools, and it's amazing to me how I can solve so many people's problems by making a feature, and they can get a little bit better and solve their own problems. And so really it's about, to me, I just shared experience between people, like have empathy for someone else, and take small steps towards whatever your goals are. Don't just think like, I have to go do this thing, all or nothing. I need a boot camp. I need something. Sometimes it might work, but in a lot of cases, like, solve one problem at a time, and then next week there'll be a new problem.
So at last, have you seen any videos of mine on YouTube?
Yeah, I did watch a couple.
So what is as a 15 years experienced person into different fields, what do you say about, what is your observation on my work?
I think you're off to a good start with just getting people and just talking to them. I think it's a great learning experience for you. I think you'll get a lot of experience by understanding where someone's coming from and saying, oh, well, like, this different roles have completely different backgrounds, and people you talk to don't have the same background as me. So, like, it's great just to be able to learn from other people's experience, which I think is a really good thing for you. I think there should be a little bit of commonality if you want people to come back and say, oh, well, like, what's the common pattern we're looking at for, are you doing this for your own benefit, which is fine. I did all my early work for my own benefit. Are you doing this to teach a specific audience? Are you doing this to entertain? And understanding what your goals are will help you shape whatever it is, who you bring on the show, how you ask your questions, what questions you ask. Those are all areas that I think you can really focus on, and understand what your goal is, and then produce the right output based on those goals. If your goal is to entertain people, you're probably going to have to be like real flashy, and you're going to have to like do some more attention grabbing things. You're going to have to like be kind of extravagant in some areas, because attention is hard to come by from people. But if your goal is to educate yourself, I think bringing on as diverse a background of people as possible is the best solution. And so different goals have different paths to get there. So I would really just focus on whatever it is you're trying to do with the channel and with the show, and then from that understand and say, okay, well, how do I get to that goal? And don't try to do everything, because you won't have any focus, and it won't resonate for people.
So thank you for giving me your valuable time and telling me about a lot of useful and valuable things. I'm sure a lot of people who watches and listens to your words will get some information, and that will help in changing or improving themselves.
I hope so. That's my goal.
Definitely. So can I put this video on my YouTube channel for social media, internet, podcast, everywhere with your permission?
Yes.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. Keep going. I'll request you after 5 years again, and I will take your another interview when you've been in a bigger position.
I'll love to see what position you're in 5 years.
Yeah, definitely. You will see.
Yeah.
But definitely, I will learn even on that day also. I'm sure you will be growing. You are the person, like, you're a moving person. You don't stay in a particular place.
Yeah. That's the goal for me, and I try to help other people do the same.
So thanks, man. Thank you for your time.
Yep. You're welcome.
Yeah. Bye.